The sun had barely risen when they came for her. Shadows long and cold spilled across the clay compound as the village elders stood at the threshold of Nwachi's hut, their staffs scraping against the earth like quiet threats. Her aunt, her only living relative now, stood behind them with her arms folded tight against her chest, a linen scarf tied to cover her mouth, not for mourning but for silence. Nwachi was 14, thin as river reeds, with hair her mother used to braid every market morning. That morning the braids were gone. Her hair was undone and wild, her face streaked with the remnants of a night spent awake. They did not knock when they entered. The youngest elder lifted her chin with 2 fingers and said nothing for a long time. The others just stared. Behind them, her mother's body still lay on the mat, covered with a faded wrapper, her hands folded over her chest as if even in death she had to protect something. The girl breathes her mother's spirit, the eldest said at last. That was the beginning. They tied the strip of cloth around her mouth just before the final rites. It was from her mother's last dress, a sky-blue fabric with small golden swirls, the one she wore on feast days. Nwachi had clutched it all night, pressing it to her face in the dark. When the women came to prepare the body, they pulled it from her grip and tore a strip from the hem. "This will cleanse what clinks," said one of them, voice cold as palm wine on a harmattan morning. "She's too close to the dead. The voice may travel into her." They bound it over Nwachi's mouth. Tight. Too tight. The knot pressed against the back of her head, rough and unrelenting. When she cried out, the cloth muted her. When she whimpered, no one looked back. She sat through the burial like that, a child silent among wailers, the ghost of her mother's scent still rising from the cloth, hibiscus oil and kola nut. Her tears soaked the fabric, but no one let her remove it. She wasn't allowed to cry aloud. She wasn't allowed to speak. They made her sleep outside the compound that night. "The voice lingers strongest in the house of death," said the priestess, waving her broom of feathers and murmuring a prayer Nwachi didn't understand. Her aunt lit a small fire, placed her outside beside a calabash of water and said, "Stay there until your mouth cools." The first night, Nwachi dreamt of her mother's hands braiding her hair. She could feel every pull, every tuck. Her mother didn't speak in the dream, she just hummed a song about white birds flying over yam fields. Nwachi hummed back in her sleep, and in the dream her mother smiled. But when she woke up the cloth was tighter. No one touched it in the night, and yet it squeezed her like hands trying to hold something inside her. Her lips ached. Her tongue felt like it didn't belong to her anymore. The villagers started watching her differently. Mothers pulled their toddlers close when Nwachi walked by. Men turned their eyes away as if she were carrying disease. Even the goats backed away when she came near. They said she walked too quietly now. That her shadow stretched in directions it shouldn't. That her eyes looked too much like her mother's, and her mother had died too aware. On the 3rd day children began whispering. "She talks to her mother in the night. She doesn't sleep. She sits by the tree and hums. I saw her hands move when no one was looking." They said the cloth was still warm. That it never dried even when left in the sun. Some swore they saw steam rising from her mouth on hot days, like a cooking pot struggling to hold its fire. But the truth was, Nwachi hadn't spoken a word. Not even in her thoughts. She kept her mind as still as she could, afraid that if she dared to remember her mother's voice too clearly, the spirit might hear her and come walking. And still things moved. She'd wake up to flower petals by her feet. Small tokens in her hair, a cowrie shell one morning, a crushed feather another. When she stood too long near the well, the water rippled without wind. On the 5th day they asked the priestess if the cloth had worked. The priestess frowned. "It has kept her quiet. But not empty." One of the younger women murmured, "She should have wailed. Wailing gives the soul freedom. Her silence holds it too close." So they changed the rule. They brought her to the edge of the forest and ordered her to weep, but still not to speak. Just tears. Loud sobs. Enough to prove the grief had passed. But Nwachi couldn't. The cloth had taken too much. Her body tried, her chest heaved, her throat tightened, but no sound came. Not even a breath. She just stood there, hands trembling, eyes wide, face blank. The villagers took it as proof. "She's holding it back," they said. "She doesn't want to let go. She wants the spirit to stay." They left her there, beneath the irako tree, the sun slanting through the branches in long, thin lines. All she could do was dig her fingers into the dirt and mouth a name she was not allowed to say. At night, she felt the earth warm beneath her. The same way her mother's back used to warm the mat when they slept close. A voice drifted through the leaves, not quite words, not quite wind. But it curved around her, nestled against her ear like a breath. It didn't ask her anything, It just stayed with her. By the 7th day her mouth had gone numb. The cloth now smelled of iron and ash and no one would touch it. Her aunt refused to feed her. If she doesn't want to let go, she said, then let the hunger carry her to the spirits. But Nwachi did not starve. Every night someone, or something, left a plate of roasted yam by her side. Warm. Spiced with pepper the way her mother used to make. She ate it. Every bite tasted like memory. One night, she dreamt of the sky tearing open and her mother's voice pouring through like rain. Your silence is not weakness, it said. Asterisk, it is a language only the living forget. Asterisk. On the 9th day, 2 days after tradition said the spirit should have passed, the elders came back. They stood over her, confused and uneasy. The cloth is still warm, one whispered. It should be cold by now. She hasn't spoken. She hasn't cried. She hasn't faded. They removed the cloth. It peeled away like old skin, slick with something that shimmered faintly in the light. Beneath it, her lips were uncracked, unbruised, her breath steady, her eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. The priestess leaned close and whispered, "Whose voice do you carry now?" Nwachi did not reply. She turned to the tree, touched its bark gently and walked away. That was the last time she was seen within the compound walls. Some say she went into the forest to find the place where the dead listen. Some say she now carries her mother's voice in her bones, and that when the wind howls through certain trees, it hums a lullaby about white birds and yam fields. Others say the cloth returned to the hut one night, folded neatly on her aunt's bed, still warm, still holding breath. Nwachi did not untie the cloth. Even after the elders left, even after her aunt stopped looking her in the eye, even after the sky shifted from wet gray to the deep gold of dry season, she kept the strip of blue cloth bound over her mouth. It had begun to smell, not of rot, not of sweat, but of something old. Burnt wood, bitter herbs, rain on iron. And beneath it, barely there, a scent she could only call alive. As if it breathed beside her in the dark. As if it, too, dreamt. Her hands trembled the first time she noticed the humming. It wasn't from the earth. Or from the trees. It came from the knot itself, the place where the cloth cinched behind her skull. A low murmur, like the sound of voices inside a pot with the lid still on. She couldn't make out the words. But they made her heart slow. Made her eyes close faster than sleep allowed. She began dreaming again. In the dreams her mother walked backward. Always backward. Through a burning house. Not screaming. Not afraid. Just walking steadily as flames coiled around her head wrap, licking the edges of her wrapper, dancing on the bones of the hut. She never looked at Nwachi directly. But she moved with intention as if stepping through time, unmaking it. And the cloth, the one tied over Nwachi's mouth, was never on her face in those dreams. It floated in the air like a snake made of fabric, unraveling thread by thread. Each time it moved, it sang. Not with a human voice. Not with an instrument. It sang with memory. A child's giggle stitched into one edge. A lullaby sewn into the hem. The rhythm of pestles pounding yam, of her mother's feet shuffling as she swept, of night rains tapping zinc. All the songs Nwachi had not been allowed to sing now spiraled from the cloth's threadbare body. She would wake to find it quiet again. Damp from her breath. Still tied. But sometimes it was looser. Sometimes the knot would be wet. Once it was reknotted entirely, tighter, firmer, in a loop she didn't know how to make. And she knew, even if no one said it, it was tying itself. Her aunt began sleeping with a blade under her pillow. The villagers avoided Nwachi now, even in silence. They didn't like that she didn't flinch when people passed. Or how goats gave her a wide berth. Or that dogs, once hostile, now lay beside her in the dirt, quiet as shadows. Children were told not to stare too long. She listens too hard, someone whispered. And when she listens, things answer. The priestess came once more, but this time only watched from afar. She did not enter the compound. She only tapped her staff once and muttered, "The hem sings." No one asked what she meant. Nwachi spent her nights curled on her raffia mat, eyes wide open, letting the cloth breathe against her skin. Some nights she did not sleep at all. She listened. And the cloth told her stories. Of pots cracking from within. Of feathers too heavy to fly. Of a mother with heat in her chest and smoke behind her teeth, swallowing the pain of every silence she had to gift her daughter. Nwachi learned things. Not by words, but by the way the cloth vibrated when she lay still. She began humming without parting her lips, soft vibrations in her throat. She learned to match the rhythm of the cloth's pulsing. At times it beat like a drum. At others it buzzed like a fly over firewood. One night she touched the hem. Just the corner. It was damp. She lifted her finger and stared. Black ash marked her fingertip. Fresh. Still warm. And then for the first time the cloth moved. It unwound slowly like a serpent waking. The knot slipped open with a sigh, and the strip fluttered down her neck, curling in her lap. Her mouth was free. But she did not speak. The cloth hovered before her. Folded itself in half. Then again. Then twisted. It became a line, then a shape, then a coil. It danced. She watched, not blinking, as it formed a spiral, the symbol her mother once used to stitch into Nwachi's old headscarves. A symbol that meant, return if you must, but never come back the same. She reached for it, and the cloth leapt away. It floated up, not high, just above her knees, and began spinning slowly like a leaf caught in a whirl of dust. As it spun, it began to hum again. The sound grew louder, no longer the cloth's alone, but a harmony of other voices, thin and distant. Women's voices. Children's laughter. Her mother's hush. A drum, faint as a footstep. Then just as suddenly as it began, the cloth dropped. Flat. Still. As if nothing had ever happened. She picked it up with both hands. It was cold now. Too cold. She pressed it to her chest. And it burned. Not with fire. With memory. She remembered her mother pouring herbs into the basin before bed, singing to them. She remembered the story of the girl who carried silence on her back like a gourd, too full to open without drowning. She remembered the song her mother sang the day her voice cracked during puberty, and how she'd cupped Nwachi's cheeks and whispered, when your voice deepens, let it deepen with truth. That memory shattered her. She cried. No wailing. No screams. Just tears, heavy and clean, falling onto her lap. The cloth absorbed them. And the more it drank, the warmer it became. The next morning, her aunt found her asleep with it wrapped around her throat like a scarf. When she tried to pull it off, it bit her. A quick sting. Just one. A welt rose on her palm. Her aunt didn't try again. That day Nwachi walked to the old riverbank. She hadn't been there since her mother's death. No one followed. She sat by the edge, stared at the reflection that never quite matched her face, and untied the cloth once more. She dipped it into the water. The river did not swallow it. Instead it floated, not drifting, not sinking. It spun gently. Once. Twice. Then began to move upstream against the current. Nwachi let go. Watched it glide, trailing silver ripples. When it vanished behind the bend, she whispered her first word in weeks. Return. The trees rustled. The water stilled. Something had heard. When she walked back, she found her aunt's mat empty. No one knew where the woman had gone. Only a smear of ash on her doorstep. A scent of old pepper and wet charcoal. The cloth was waiting on Nwachi's mat. Dry. Warm. Folded into a perfect triangle. She tied it around her neck, not her mouth. And for the first time the hem did not hum, it rested. That night her mother came again in her dreams. But this time she walked forward through the flames. Her face was whole. Her wrapper unburnt. She held the cloth in one hand and stretched out the other. Nwachi took it. They walked together. The house behind them turned to smoke. And the song, the one that lived in the hem, rose around them like wings. They led her before dawn. No one spoke her name. The elders had gathered long before the sun, their wrappers dusted with ash, their faces marked with lines of white clay. The sky hung heavy and purple above them, the color of something about to break. Nwachi walked barefoot between them, her cloth-bound throat stiff and tight, her breath shallow. She did not resist. Resistance was not allowed when cleansing was declared. They called it protection. She knew it was punishment. The river was swollen from last week's rains, the water thick and slow as it curled around the stones. Mist hovered just above the surface, coiling around the ankles of the villagers like spirit smoke. Drummers stood silent, their hands resting on taut skin. No one beat rhythm yet. First the offering, then the silence, then the binding. Nwachi was made to kneel. A mat of woven grass had been placed on the muddy bank, already soaked through. She felt the cold climb her legs as she settled into position. She did not shiver. She did not cry. Her eyes remained open, staring across the water where the trees leaned in like listeners. The priestess stepped forward. Her white gown dragged the earth, streaked with lines of river mud. In her hands she held a bowl, carved from wood blackened with age and use. Steam rose from it faintly, carrying a scent that curled into Nwachi's nose. Camphor, ashes, dried pepper leaves. Something bitter lived in the scent, something ancient. The priestess did not look at Nwachi. She raised the bowl and spoke to the river. Let what clings be pulled. Let what echoes be sealed. Let the girl carry no one but herself. The villagers repeated the words in one voice except for Nwachi. She couldn't. Her voice stayed buried behind the cloth already tied around her neck. It had not hummed since the dream. It had slept quietly, cool and heavy. But now, as the bowl was passed over her head, she felt it stir. Her tongue ached. Not from dryness. From heat. From something deeper. The priestess dipped her fingers into the bowl and painted Nwachi's forehead, her chest, the tops of her bare shoulders. Then she took a new strip of cloth, red this time, streaked with blue thread, and wrapped it slowly around Nwachi's neck, just above the older, faded one. Each loop made her feel smaller. The world seemed to narrow with every turn. By the third wrap, her ears rang. By the fourth, her heart felt like it had moved from her chest to her throat. By the fifth, she could no longer taste the air. The knot was pulled tight. And her voice was gone. Not silent, gone. Pulled inward, as though it had left her throat entirely and settled somewhere behind her ribs. It echoed there, faint and distant, like a drum played far away in a forest she couldn't reach. The cloth buzzed faintly but not in language. In memory. The priestess stepped back. It is done, she said. The girl is bound. Her voice is sealed. Let no one unbind her until the river speaks her name. Nwachi's head remained bowed, but inside her chest, something shifted. Something watched. Not just her. The trees. The stones. The river. Something had felt the cloth's hum. Something old. They made her remain kneeling through sunrise. The sun broke slowly, casting gold over the water. As it rose, heat crept across her back and face, drying the mud on her legs, baking the clay into her skin. But still she knelt. Still she listened. She began to hear things again. Not with her ears. With her bones. The sound of weaving, of fingers looping thread through thread. The sound of laughter caught in the throat. The sound of a mother whispering a secret as she plaited her daughter's hair. These weren't memories of her own. They came from the cloth. From the knot. She felt the layers tighten again without anyone touching her. The cloth was breathing. When she was finally allowed to stand, her knees shook, but she didn't fall. The villagers filed away, their heads down. The priestess remained last, her gaze heavy with something unreadable. She carries echoes, the old woman said. But echoes never stay quiet forever. Nwachi did not blink. That night, they locked her in the outer hut, a space usually used for storing yam and drying cassava. Her mat was thin. The roof leaked. But it didn't matter. She lay on her side, hands beneath her cheek, the cloth warm against her skin. And the river came to her. Not in water. In song. She heard it, rising from the ground under her mat, from the spaces between the boards, from the gaps in the thatch roof. It wasn't water, not exactly. It was rhythm. Pulsing, circling, humming like the cloth once had. Her body vibrated to it, her bones tingling like struck drums. The voice came next. Not her mother's. Her own. But not the voice she knew. This one was older. Deeper. It spoke in tones she didn't recognize but felt were hers. I am not the silence, it said. I am what they tried to drown in silence. Nwachi opened her eyes. The hut was dark. But she was not afraid. She reached up and touched the outer cloth. Moved. Only a little. Like a sleeping creature adjusting its weight. But it was enough. Her fingers tingled. Her teeth ached faintly. And in her throat the echo grew louder. It was her name. Not as the villagers said it. But how her mother used to say it. Softly. Like a secret wrapped in morning sun. Nwachi. She pressed her palm to the floor. The ground was wet. Not puddles. Not soaked. But damp. As though the river had risen through the soil just to sit with her. As though it too had been bound. As though it had been listening all along. She wept without sound. The tears ran down her cheeks and soaked into the cloth, and for a moment she imagined the threads drinking them, holding them, stitching them into song. In the morning when they opened the door, they found her kneeling again. Not because she had to, but because the earth had asked her to. The priestess returned later that day. She did not speak to Nwachi. She sat beside her and traced the knot with one finger, her brows furrowed. Then, without warning, she dipped her hand into her satchel and pulled out a small mirror, the size of a kola nut. She held it before Nwachi's face. In it, Nwachi saw not just herself. She saw the fire. The dream house burning. Her mother walking backward. And her own face, not 14 but older. Stern. Glowing faintly. The cloth around her neck shimmered in the reflection. But in the mirror it wasn't tied. It flowed. Like water. The priestess closed the mirror with a snap. "She's not bound," she muttered. "She's being woven." No one else understood what she meant. But Nwachi did. She closed her eyes again and listened. And the echo inside her chest smiled. The cloth had never come off. Not once. Even as her skin adjusted to its grip and the muscle of her jaw weakened from disuse, the strip of her mother's final dress remained tied around Nwachi's mouth and neck, a seal against everything she could have said. It grew damp each time she breathed, especially at night, when her breath warmed the fibers and her dreams stirred behind her shut eyes. And yet it did not rot. Instead it thickened, as though her breath didn't weaken it but fed it. The thread swelled gently, almost greedily, absorbing her silence, her heat, her sorrow. Some nights it cooled against her skin. Other nights it grew so warm it felt like a second pulse. Nwachi no longer feared it. She no longer tried to speak. Instead she watched. From her mat in the yam hut, she listened to the village move through days that did not care for her quiet. People walked past her like wind against closed shutters. Her cousins laughed nearby, voices rough-edged and free. The women pounded yam and gossiped about suitors and spirits, while the men argued over who should fix the canoe. Life continued. But not for her. And yet, something had shifted. It began with the animals. The compound goats no longer passed too close to her mat. The chickens never pecked near her hands. They watched her instead. From corners. From shadows. Even the birds on the rooftop cried less when she was near. Then came the fire. The hearth fire inside her aunt's kitchen was a pride of the household, kept alive for 10 years without once going cold. It had roasted fish and boiled palm stew, kept the newborns warm, whispered songs through crackling wood. But lately, it flickered oddly whenever Nwachi entered the room to fetch water or sweep. Sometimes it shrank. Sometimes it danced sideways. One night, as Nwachi passed the threshold in silence, the fire flared, not in flame but in heat. A sudden burst of warmth struck her chest, and for a breathless moment, the cloth on her mouth pulsed against her lips. She froze. And so did the house. Her aunt, who had been grinding pepper in a clay bowl, dropped it. The red paste splattered across the floor like blood. But no one moved. No one spoke. Even the walls seemed to lean inward, straining to hear. The fire hissed once and then went out. There was no wind. No hand. No ash to choke it. Just stillness, and the quiet breath of a girl with a damp cloth wrapped around her mouth. Nwachi stepped backward. The heat remained. That night, as the sky folded into darkness and her cousins whispered behind the walls, Nwachi lay on her mat and traced the edge of the cloth with one finger. It had grown heavier. Not in weight but in presence. Like a child pressed against her, sleeping. Like a thing alive. And then came the word. She hadn't meant to say it. She hadn't even thought it. It was not shaped in the mind or sculpted with lips. It rose. From the ache in her belly. From the knot in her spine. From the place where her mother's fingers used to part her hair. It came out muffled and soft, but it was still a word. Her first in weeks. Mother. She didn't even realize she had spoken until the air shifted. Not the wind. Not the temperature. The air itself, as though the entire room had sucked in a breath and held it. Outside, the moon dimmed behind a sudden sweep of cloud. Inside, the fire in the main hearth, already low, snapped and died. Nwachi sat up slowly, her heartbeat tapping like rain on a drum. She pressed a hand to the cloth. It felt warm. Then cold. Then warm again. The silence deepened. It wasn't the silence of sleep or stillness. It was the silence of listening. Even the insects had stopped their song. She knelt upright, still not removing the cloth, still bound in every way that mattered. She touched her chest. Her skin was cold. Her fingers trembled, not from fear but from something older, recognition. Something had heard. And it had understood. The dream came quickly after that. She stood again in the burning house, the flames licking at the walls but never touching her. And there, walking backward, always backward, was her mother. The same wrap. The same beads at her wrists. But this time she turned. Not her whole face, only the edge of it. A profile in ash. Her mouth moved. But instead of words there was cloth. Bound. Red and blue and soot-colored, same as the one on Nwachi's own face. They were bound the same. And then her mother raised a hand and pointed at Nwachi's chest. When she woke, her fingers were clenched around the cloth as if she'd been gripping it in her sleep. It throbbed faintly under her touch. She whispered again. Mother. And the trees outside rustled, though the air was still. The next day the elders summoned the priestess. They did not say why. Only that the yam hut had grown too quiet. That Nwachi had not eaten for days. That her eyes had started glowing faintly at night, like coals beneath ash. The priestess entered at dusk. She sat beside Nwachi and placed a calabash of water between them. She did not speak. She only watched. After some time she reached into her pouch and pulled out a black stone, cracked and smooth like river glass. She laid it gently on Nwachi's lap. When it touched her wrapper, it vibrated. The cloth around Nwachi's mouth twitched in response. Still Nwachi said nothing. She had said her word. And it was enough. The priestess bowed her head. "She is waking," the woman whispered. "The voice is not lost. It was never lost. Only steeped." She rose and left without another word. That night, Nwachi sat up again waiting. The cloth tightened once, then relaxed. She did not need to speak. All around her the walls listened. The fire stayed out. And her voice, her one word, lingered in the air like incense long after her lips had closed. It started with the red wrapper. Old Mama Eziok had folded it neatly every night for 17 years, the same wrapper her son had worn on the day of his burial. She kept it by her bedside, layered in camphor, always facing east so it could catch the morning sun. She never let anyone touch it, not even her grandchildren. But one dawn the wrapper was gone. In its place, a faint line of soot on the mat. A few drops of water, not from rain and not from any leaking gourd. Just there. Still and deliberate. Mama Eziok raised the entire compound screaming. Her knees cracked as she crawled from room to room, shaking sleeping mats and turning over clay pots. But the wrapper was gone. That same morning, near the yam hut, a strange sight stirred whispered gossip. A damp piece of cloth, red and faded, lay crumpled beside Nwachi's sleeping mat. The girl hadn't moved. She lay curled like always, her hands beneath her head, the cloth still wrapped around her mouth. Her skin was pale from silence, her hair loose. But the wrapper was unmistakable. Everyone recognized it and no one dared touch it. "It can't be," someone whispered. "It looks like Eziok's. It smells like river smoke." The elders gathered, muttering prayers into their palms. They said nothing to Nwachi. She would not have answered anyway. Not with her voice. Not since the cloth had melted and grown thick with her breath, becoming something alive and listening. By the next market day another cloth vanished. This one an old, patched blouse once worn by a girl who drowned the previous year. Her mother had kept it folded under her pillow, still smelling faintly of coconut oil. But she woke to find only water pooled on the pillow and the blouse gone. Again it was found outside the yam hut, this time neatly folded but cold and damp as if pulled from deep soil. People whispered more openly now. "She is calling the dead. She sleeps and their belongings return to her." No. The dead come and take what is theirs. No one sees her move. But their garments always find her. Some blamed her silence. Others blamed the cloth tied around her face. The elders whispered of spirits that enter through breath and hide behind skin. They spoke of thin-voiced girls from old folktales who could draw the past back to life through longing alone. But the one who truly believed was Mama Odwenyi. Her daughter, Adiz, had died in childbirth 2 years ago. They had buried her with nothing. No cloth, no beads, no fan, because the rains had come early and the ground had demanded haste. Only afterward had Mama Odwenyi realized how empty the grave had been. So she sewed a small tunic from her daughter's childhood clothes and kept it under her mat, whispering to it each night, "I'm sorry. I should have wrapped you warm." When she heard what was happening with Nwachi, she was terrified. And then one night she dreamed. In the dream, Adiz stood at the edge of a stream, her feet covered in silt, her hair coiled with riverweed. She did not smile. She did not speak. But she raised her arms slowly and pointed. To Nwachi. To her mouth. To the cloth. Mama Odwenyi woke gasping. The tunic was gone. Soaked cloth was found again near Nwachi's mat. No one had seen her move. No prince led to her. The yam hut was still locked from within. But that morning Nwachi sat up straighter. Her eyes were wide. The cloth around her face fluttered slightly in the wind, though no wind touched anything else. Mama Odwenyi approached her with trembling fingers. She didn't speak. She only sat near her, resting the side of her palm on the dirt. And for a moment, Nwachi turned her gaze to the older woman's hand, and nodded once. That was when the elders convened. They sat beneath the irako tree and argued for hours, their sandals dusted red with courtyard soil. Some said the cloths must be taken and burned. Others insisted Nwachi should be cleansed again, as if any cleansing had ever helped. The oldest among them, a woman with eyes milked by age, simply said, "Let them come. The dead know what they want." The silence after her words stretched long. From that day on more garments vanished. Not just from homes but from shrines. From locked trunks. From baskets stored under rafters. A waistband here. A child's wrapper there. Even a funerary sash taken from a chief's tomb was later found near Nwachi, this one bone-dry, yet wrapped in a perfect spiral. The villagers began avoiding her path. And still she spoke no word. But her breath was different now. Rhythmic. Intentional. The cloth over her lips would pulse faintly in the evening light, as if exhaling another life. Children said she hummed, though no one could hear the tune. One boy, bold, reckless, dared to touch the hem of a damp cloth near her mat. He cried out immediately and dropped it, claiming it burned like the sun. When his mother slapped him for lying, she found her own hand marked with soot. Even the priestess returned, not to question but to sit beside the girl. "She is not gathering," the priestess whispered after an hour. "They are returning to her." To her? To the voice beneath the cloth. On the night of the full moon things changed again. It rained but not on the compound. Only over the yam hut. A narrow cone of water, pouring gently from cloudless sky. The soil drank it greedily. The walls of the hut stayed dry. Only the roof, and the ground beneath Nwachi, shimmered with rain. By morning 5 more cloths had appeared. All were recognized. All had once belonged to the dead. And Nwachi was smiling. Just a little. A tilt at the corners of her eyes. That was the morning the first mother came. She did not shout. She did not plead. She brought a bundle wrapped in twine, a blouse, a sash, and a threadbare scarf, and placed it beside Nwachi's mat. She whispered her child's name once. Nwachi did not speak. But the cloth at her mouth rose slightly. And the bundle unfurled itself. The woman wept and left. After that, the gifts began. Not in exchange. Not for magic. Only in longing. Mothers brought slippers. Wives brought head wraps. Brothers brought wristbands, waist beads, mourning cloths, shrouds, children's blankets. And every morning the gifts would be wet, warm, or rearranged. Some would vanish completely. Some would return, holding folded messages inside. Feathers, shells, dried leaves, teeth. Nwachi became a place of memory. No one asked her to speak. But they listened. And the village slowly forgot its fear of the girl too close to the dead. Because now they came to her when they missed what was lost. And every now and then, just before dawn, a neighbor would step out and swear they'd seen a familiar figure walking backward through the mist, passing toward the yam hut. Always barefoot. Always silent. Always pointing, not at the villagers, but at Nwachi's mouth. It was the children who saw it first, a flash of color between the reeds, a trembling figure by the riverbank. They had gone to fill their calabashes, barefoot and laughing, their chatter bouncing across the early morning hush. But the laughter stopped. One by one they froze. There at the edge where land met water stood a dress. Not laid flat. Not hanging from a branch. Standing. Upright. Hollow. As if worn by an invisible body. It was soaked, dripping. Yet the fabric clung in the shape of a woman, waist slightly curved, arms hanging loose, the hem billowing gently in the wind. The sleeves rippled but did not collapse. And it faced the river like someone waiting to step in again. The children screamed and fled, sloshing water behind them, yelling through the compound until even the oldest aunt rose from her mat. Nwachi did not run. She had not even opened her eyes. But the cloth wrapped around her mouth began to hum, soft and low like thread drawn through bone. It was not a song. Not quite. But it vibrated gently, matching the beat of her pulse. Her chest lifted. Her fingers twitched. And then her hands began to move. Slowly. Deliberately. They moved across her lap as though weaving something, though nothing rested in her palms. A needle between invisible fingers. A stitch pulled tight. Then again. And again. As if she were sewing a body back into form. Outside, the elders gathered near the riverbank. No one touched the dress. Some dared not even speak. But they all knew the cloth. It was her mother's, the last thing that had been wrapped around her before the burial. Torn at the shoulder from the drowning, embroidered with small yellow suns around the collar. They had buried it with her body. They had thrown it in with a chant. And yet here it was. Not rotted. Not dirted. Wet, yes, soaked like it had just stepped out of the river. But intact. Standing. Breathing if one looked long enough. "She's calling," one old man whispered. "No," the priestess said, her voice sharp and low. "She's answering." Inside the yam hut, Nwachi's head tilted. Her fingers danced faster as though a pattern was being completed, not imagined but remembered. She rocked slightly side to side, in rhythm with something no one else could hear. That morning, birds refused to land on the roof. Smoke from cooking fires curled away from the compound. Even insects kept low to the ground as if the air itself was watching. By midday, the dress was no longer alone. A second cloth appeared at its feet, one that had been kept by Nwachi's aunt, hidden deep in a calabash. A head wrap of her mother's. Folded. No one admitted how it got there. No one had touched the dress. But now it had company. That night, as the wind howled and the river lapped high against its banks, someone swore they saw the dress walk. No footsteps. No sound. Just a slow shift, the hem gliding across wet grass, the sleeves lifting gently, like arms remembering how to sway. And in her sleep, Nwachi smiled. Just once. The cloth around her mouth pulsed with warmth. And her hands, still miming stitches, folded together as if completing a final seam. The morning came gently, the sun barely touching the tops of the trees as Nwachi stepped out to wash. The compound was still quiet, no goats bleating, no fires lit. She moved like a shadow, her feet silent against the ground. The cloth still bound around her mouth had dried during the night, firm but pliable, the scent of her mother's dress lingering in the threads like something too stubborn to forget. She crouched by the basin, a wide clay bowl filled with cool water from the stream, and dipped her hands in. The chill made her fingers twitch. She splashed her face once, twice, eyes closed against the sting. Then, softly, just above the ripple of water, she heard it. Nwachi. A whisper. Barely there. She opened her eyes. The surface of the water settled. No one stood nearby. No wind rustled the banana trees. Still, the sound had come from somewhere, not imagined. Not a dream. Her hands trembled as she dipped them again. Nwachi. Clearer this time. A breath in the basin. A voice curling up through the water, wrapping around her name like a mother swaddling her child. She stood up so fast the basin tipped, sloshing water across her legs. Her breath came shallow through the cloth, which felt suddenly tighter around her lips. Her hands flew to her mouth. Without thinking, she tore the strip free. It slid out, soaked at the edges, slightly cold. She expected it to fall to the ground like any wet rag. But it didn't. It floated. Mid-air, just above her palms, it hovered, soft, rippling slightly as if breathing. The cloth folded and curled inward, almost delicately, until it took the shape of a pair of lips. Not just lips. Her mother's lips. Familiar. The faint curve always hidden in her lullabies, the ones Nwachi hadn't heard since before the screams and smoke and silence. She staggered back. The cloth lips did not follow. They simply floated there, suspended by something unseen. Then they moved. Not to speak, not yet, but to hum. Low and old. It fluttered into the air like mist, curling through the empty space of the courtyard. Nwachi's knees buckled. She dropped to the ground. Her hands dug into the dirt. She hadn't heard that tune in years. She knew it from when her mother washed her feet. When she braided her hair before market days. When she cried after nightmares and her mother would rub her back and hum her back to sleep. The same lullaby now drifting through the courtyard, but not just from the cloth. From the wind. It moved through the trees, around corners, beneath doorways. A neighbor stirred and sat upright in bed. A child turned over in sleep and smiled. The animals in the pens rose without noise, calm and alert. And Nwachi, still on her knees, felt something deeper than fear or wonder. Recognition. The wind carried her mother's voice. Not its echo. Not a ghost. But the voice itself. Alive. She felt it move through her skin like warmth from a hearth. Her lips parted, and without meaning to, she hummed back. Softly. The cloth quivered in reply. It sank now, gently, landing on her lap. Still shaped like lips. Still warm. But resting now as if waiting. Nwachi picked it up, hand steady. She pressed it to her chest and held it there, eyes closed, heart thrumming beneath it like a drum hidden in the hills. The lullaby faded. Not abruptly, but like the end of a prayer, the kind you whisper not to be answered but simply to be heard. And in that moment, Nwachi understood. The cloth had never been meant to silence her. It had been holding her voice, keeping it safe. It had been waiting until she was ready to speak again, not just with sound but with memory, with blood, with the full weight of what had been taken. She stood slowly. The basin behind her had refilled, though no one had touched it. And when she looked into the water again, she did not see her face. She saw her mother's. Smiling. Not in pain. Not in farewell. But in pride. They gathered at the river again just as they always did, with bowls of scented ash and lengths of white cloth folded neatly like offerings. A girl stood in the center, no older than 12, trembling in her thin wrapper, her head bowed. Her name was Nkaruka. She had laughed too loudly during mourning. The elders said the joy in her voice had offended the dead. She must be cleansed, they declared, and the villagers nodded, weary and unquestioning. The priestess, her bangles clinking like teeth, stepped forward with the ritual cloth. It had been soaked in the same mixture, the oils and herbs used since the first child ever whispered too freely. She dipped it again into the bowl, murmuring words no one truly understood. Then, as was tradition, she placed it gently across the girl's lips. For a moment there was silence. Then the cloth ignited. Not slowly. Not like damp fabric catching flame. It leapt. A burst of fire erupted from the child's mouth, as if the air itself had grown hungry for something to burn. Gasps tore through the crowd. Some stepped back, others cried out. The priestess dropped her bowl and stumbled. Flames danced over the girl's cheeks, and yet she did not scream. Nkaruka stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth gagged by fire that didn't touch her skin but clung to the cloth like a curse exposed. Then came the hush. Not from fear, but from presence, because someone was walking down the river path. Barefoot. Hair loose, skin dark with memory, wrapped in a faded cloth still stained faintly at the hem. Her feet moved through the crowd like smoke, parting them without touch. Her eyes were blank, not empty but filled with something old, something seeing too much. Nwachi. The girl with the tied mouth. The girl they hadn't heard in months. Some whispered her name. Others bowed their heads. She walked up to the fire, now curling, now flickering, and stared at it. Just stared. Her lips didn't move but her eyes did. They blinked once, slowly. And the flames died. Not faded. Died. Gone in an instant as if snatched by an invisible hand. The cloth dropped from Nkaruka's mouth, singed at the edges, but the girl remained unharmed. Only her breath shook. Only her shoulders quivered. Nwachi turned toward the priestess. She said nothing for a long time. The wind began to shift, rising slightly, carrying the scent of damp earth and smoldered herbs. Somewhere distant, a branch snapped. Then Nwachi opened her mouth. No more. 2 words. 2 small words, soft and low, but they struck the gathering like thunder. Not because they were loud. Not because they were sharp. But because they were true. Carried by a voice no longer afraid, no longer buried beneath cloth and ritual. No more. The priestess fell to her knees. Behind her, elders looked at one another with uncertain eyes, suddenly unsure of the rites they had repeated without question. The river behind them rippled once and then calmed. The sun slipped slightly behind a cloud, dimming the day just enough to feel like evening had come early. Nwachi turned and walked back the way she came, not looking at anyone. Her feet left no prints on the river path, though the ground was soft. As she disappeared into the trees, the villagers remained frozen. The bowl of ash had cracked. The other cloths, folded for the next girls, had darkened, as if touched by smoke that had never risen. Nkaruka stood in the center, no longer trembling. She touched her lips. They were unburned but warm. Like breath still lingered there, not hers. Later, when asked what she saw in Nwachi's eyes, she would say, they weren't hers. And when asked what the fire felt like, she would whisper, it wasn't meant for me. It was meant to stop. That night, no one returned to the river. And no cloth was laid across any child's mouth again. The sun had not fully risen when Nwachi stepped onto the riverbank. Mist clung low to the water, veiling the path like breath waiting to be released. She carried no staff, no bowl, no drum, only a bundle of old cloth bound tightly in rope, soaked through with history. Some of it had once gagged her. Some had silenced others. All had carried the weight of fear, of shame passed down like inheritance. She did not summon the village. She did not call the elders. But they came. One by one, stirred by a pull they couldn't name, people left their doorways and cooking pots. Some still clutched mourning brooms. Others arrived barefoot, the soles of their feet whispering against the earth. No one spoke. Nwachi stood at the edge of the water, her feet half submerged. The bundle in her arms looked heavy, though she held it like something fragile. Her skin, once marked by ash and oil, now glowed faintly with the warmth of quiet fire, not flames but memory burning bright beneath flesh. She knelt and opened the bundle. The cloth spilled out in layers, some frayed and graying with age, others newer, still creased from recent rituals. Each piece carried a story. A girl too loud. A daughter who dared laugh. A wife who wept too long. A child who asked too many questions. Silenced all of them. Bound for their voices. Nwachi touched each one. As her fingers brushed them, they twitched, gently as if remembering the mouths they once covered. Then she built a small fire. Not large, not grand. Just a circle of dry twigs and tinder, fed slowly until a steady flame rose, golden and quiet. She placed the first cloth in, the one once tied around her own face, and it burned like paper that had been waiting. One by one she fed the others to the flame. Smoke rose, pale at first, then darker, then bright again, and as it thickened, so did the air. It began to hum. Not like wind, not like bird song, but like voices layered over each other. Low, high, old, young. Some angry. Some broken. Some singing. Then came the words. Not shouted. Not screamed. Spoken. Soft and full and everywhere. I begged them not to. I only wanted to laugh. I was 10 years old. She said I was loud like thunder. I thought that meant I was strong. She died without saying goodbye. I still remember her voice. The villagers fell to their knees. Not out of fear. Not shame. But reverence. The fire danced taller. The smoke twisted into spirals, shapes of mouths open and speaking. Some cried. Some smiled. All were full of breath long withheld. The wind carried their words. Through the trees. Over the rooftops. Into the very center of the village. Women covered their hearts. Men bowed low. Children held on to their mothers asking, "Who are they?" And the answer came from the flames. "We are the ones who spoke before you. We are the ones who were told not to. We are the ones whose breath stitched your name into the wind." A ripple passed over the river. The water did not boil. It did not rise. But it shimmered, like a mirror remembering every face it ever reflected. Nwachi stood. Her eyes were not full of tears. Her mouth was not smiling. She was simply still. The final cloth, one stained with the oil of a girl who had not survived her silence, she held up to the light. Then with care she kissed it, and placed it into the fire. It burned slower than the others, curling in on itself like it didn't want to go. But it did. And when it was gone, the voices faded, not into nothing but into breath. The air breathed with them. The fire dimmed. Nwachi turned and walked away. No one followed. They stayed kneeling long after she disappeared into the trees. Not because they were waiting for more, but because something sacred had passed through them. From that day on, the village no longer kept cloth for silencing. They kept it for sewing, for wrapping babies, for dancing, for weaving stories into thread. And whenever wind passed through the compound, rustling the clotheslines, some swore they could hear a lullaby woven into the folds. A mother's mouth. Still speaking. The path to Nwachi's hut was narrow, winding between tall grasses and old trees, but it was worn smooth from the many feet that had walked it. Mothers carried daughters on their backs. Girls walked barefoot, carrying baskets of plain cloth, their eyes full of questions they didn't yet know how to ask. Everyone came quietly. They didn't need to be told. Inside the hut, it smelled of herbs and ashwood, of palm oil and something softer, like old memories kept warm by fire. The roof creaked in rhythm with the wind. Dried flowers hung upside down from the beams, their petals whispering in a language only the careful could hear. And at the center of it all sat Nwachi, cross-legged on a reed mat, her hands never still. Thread flowed through her fingers like water. Cloths bloomed beneath her touch, not bright, not grand, but full of pulse. Her stitches were not just decoration. They held meaning. They held memory. Some cloths warmed as they were worn. Some carried lullabies sewn in silence. Some changed color with the moon. But always they made the wearer feel seen. She did not call herself a healer. She never called herself anything at all. But the people called her the weaver of voice. Those who came to her had been shamed for singing too loud, laughing too hard, asking too many questions. They brought the garments they were beaten in, the ones they were told to hide. They asked not for beauty, not for spells, but for the return of something lost. Something buried. Nwachi never turned anyone away. She would take the cloth, listen to its fibers as if it spoke, and begin. Her fingers moved slow at first, then fast. And as she stitched, a hum filled the room, low, like breath under a song, like the heartbeat of something ancient. And if you listened close enough, you'd hear words forming in the hum. Sometimes they were the names of grandmothers long gone. Sometimes they were stories no one remembered being told. Sometimes they were simply the truth: you are not broken. On the far wall of the hut hung a single strip of fabric, aged, pale, never touched. It swayed even when there was no wind. No one dared ask to touch it. It hummed too clearly. It was the cloth once tied around Nwachi's mouth. It had survived fire, river, and ritual. It bore the breath of her mother, the songs of the dead, and the silence that nearly consumed them all. Now it hung like a guardian, like a flame that never burned out. When children grew old enough to ask why the cloth sang, their mothers would smile and say, because it remembers what it was made to forget. Nwachi spoke little, but when she did, people listened. Her voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It settled into the chest like warmth, like truth. It was a voice that came from deeper than the throat, a voice stitched from pain and healed with fire. Some say that one day a hunter came asking for a charm, something to make his arrows fly straighter. Nwachi looked at him, then handed him a cloth embroidered with the words, "Find what you're really aiming at." He never returned. But they say he stopped hunting animals after that. He became a singer. Others say a girl once came to her, sobbing, claiming she'd forgotten her mother's voice. Nwachi wrapped a scarf around her neck and whispered, "Then speak, and let her return through you." The girl sang that night in her sleep. The whole village heard her. The cloths Nwachi made weren't sold in markets. They weren't worn for fashion. They were passed down like recipes, like sacred names. And in every home that had once bound a mouth, there now hung a small piece of thread from Nwachi's hand. Not to remind them of guilt, but to remind them to listen. To daughters. To mothers. To wind. And when Nwachi grew old, older than anyone could remember, she sat beneath the cloth on the wall and closed her eyes. She did not die. She simply stopped stitching. The thread unraveled itself, winding into the earth, into rivers, into trees. And if you pass by the tall grasses where her hut once stood, you may hear it, a hum, a whisper, the ghost of thread moving through cloth. It says only one thing: speak, and be heard.